Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be diving into one of my favourite games of all time, Days Gone. I've always had a soft spot for the zombie apocalypse setting, and this game absolutely nails a gritty, emotional, open world survival vibe. From the haunting, beautiful landscapes of Oregon to the tense encounters with freakers and marauders, Days Gone creates a world I just kept coming back to. But what really keeps me hooked are the characters. Complex, flawed and deeply human. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the lore and backstory of some of the key characters in Days Gone. We'll look at who they are, what they were like before the outbreak, and how they've changed over time. And maybe I'll throw in some personal thoughts on each of them along the way. So if you're a fan of Days Gone, or just love great character-driven storytelling in games, stick around, because this will be a deep dive into the characters of Days Gone. Deacon Lee, otherwise known as Deacon St. John, was born in the early 1980s and grew up in Farewell, Oregon. As a child, his mother died of unknown causes, and his father once taught him how to eliminate a rat's nest by drowning them. On Saturdays, he hopped on freight trains and rode through the Cascade rail lines. In high school, Deacon didn't achieve well academically and eventually dropped out. As a young adult, Deacon enlisted in the United States Army and served a full tour of duty in Afghanistan. He was stationed in the 10th Mountain Division, where his unit worked in collaboration with the Northern Alliance. Although Deacon served honourably, he hated every minute of his military service. On a mission whilst advancing on Mazar, Deacon's squad was ambushed by a Taliban group with flatbed trucks equipped with Zu-23 modified anti-aircraft guns. Their Humvee was destroyed and fell off a cliff into the Hari River. Deacon survived the crash and swam out to the wreckage, hoping to find survivors, only to pull 8 bodies back to shore, including his sergeant Tanner. Emotionally traumatized by this event, Deacon decided to leave the military. After being discharged, Deacon returned to the United States, where he purchased a motorcycle and spent a couple of years on the road drifting from place to place before he finally returned home. Deacon later gained employment as a mechanic in a motorcycle shop owned by an old man named Jack, who was the president of the Mongrels Motorcycle Club. Jack personally offered him a membership, which Deacon gladly accepted and was patched as an enforcer in the MC. He soon met his fellow Sergeant-at-Arms member named Boozer, who became his closest friend, and the pair came to regard each other as brothers. Deacon later met an African-American man named Jersey Jim, whom he became good friends with and patched him into the MC. Some years later, Deacon found Boozer halfway through a whiskey case, who was suffering from depression after his wife Joni was killed in a drunken ride. Unwilling to watch him commit Sudoku, Deacon chugged a whole bottle and told him if he was going to drink himself to death, he wouldn't be doing it alone, because that's what brothers do. Boozer was touched by Deacon's willingness to sacrifice himself for him and continued to live, burying his grief. One day, Deacon met a young botanist named Sarah Whittaker after her car had broken down. He stopped to ask her for directions and pretended to go on his way, only to return and finally offer her a ride, which she accepted. The pair drove up the road and were nearly ambushed by a large truck. Deacon then drove her back to the car, only to discover a group of rednecks attempting to rob it. Deacon engaged the trio but was overpowered and beaten. Sarah managed to scare them off by discharging a warning shot. Grateful for her assistance, Deacon decided to remain by her side. Deacon and Sarah began a relationship, and the pair grew to love each other dearly. She tutored him in the study of plants, including the use of lavender. Deacon likewise taught her how to ride a motorcycle. He also befriended her younger sister Emma, who grew particularly close to him. However, Sarah's parents held a low opinion of Deacon due to his outlaw lifestyle. Sometime later, a disgraced MC member named Jesse Williamson murdered a fellow member over drugs. The MC's code stipulated that the individual must be stripped of their colours. Deacon, Boozer and Jim forcibly held him down while Jack removed his mongrel tattoo with a blowtorch, and Jesse was excommunicated from the club. Deacon gradually came to regret his part in Jesse's torture, as he never told Sarah about the event, and knew that she would never forgive him for committing such an immoral act. One night, Deacon brought Sarah to a restricted pot farm owned by the MC. The pair went out for a romantic midnight stroll through a forest which led to a waterfall. He then proposed to Sarah with his mongrel ring, which she gladly accepted. Deacon later chose to become nomad, meaning that he would be less involved with the MC's activities in order to spend more time with Sarah. This decision upset the majority of his brothers in the club, apart from Boozer, who remained loyal to him. On their wedding day, Deacon and Sarah attended a small chapel in Marion Forks. However, both the MC as well as Sarah's family failed or refused to attend the ceremony. During the Freaka virus outbreak, Deacon, along with Boozer and Sarah, was in Farewell during the outbreak of an unknown virus. Whilst making their way through the ravaged city, Sarah was stabbed. Hearing of an evacuation at the old brewery, the trio made their way there, cutting through a mechanics where a man had lost his mind over the death of his wife. Deacon attempts to defuse the situation, but is forced to kill the man. They make it to the brewery, and Deacon threatens the Nero worker O'Brien to take them. However, there is not enough room for all of them. Boozer is injured and would not be able to make it on his own. Deacon puts Sarah on the chopper, giving her his mongrel ring, the same ring he proposed with, telling her he wants it back. Deacon and Boozer make out the city and head for the refugee camp the chopper was bound for. However, it has already been overrun by freakers. Despite being outnumbered, Deacon and Boozer manage to fight their way through and kill every single one. Deacon searches for Sarah but does not find her amongst the corpses. Despite not finding her body, Deacon concludes that Sarah is dead and carves her name into a stone to serve as a grave. The virus causes a complete societal collapse, with relatively few humans left alive. Adapting to the new structure of life, Deacon and Boozer took up work as bounty hunters, killing freakers and rogue humans who threatened survivor camps. The pair did runs for several camps, including ones led by Mark Copeland, a conspiracy theorist who believes the apocalypse was an orchestrated event by the US government. Ada Tucker, a former prison matron who had a reputation for treating the people in her camps like slaves. And Iron Mike, a man who sought for all people to come together in order to better rebuild. However, Iron Mike severed ties with Deacon after finding out he was sending people to Tucker's camp, as he considered her practice of paying for new recruits to be akin to slave trading. Iron Mike threatened to break Deacon's neck if he ever came back. Deacon and Boozer settled in an old Forest Service watchtower on top of O'Leary Mountain in the Cascade Wilderness. They ran with several others including Rikki, Alvarez and Leon, though they were eventually on their own again. During this time, a cult called Rest in Peace, also known as the Rippers, formed and led by a man named Carlos, who preached the idea that freakers were the next stage in human evolution. The cult was innately hostile to all those who were not part of the cult, believing that everyone should be made to see the freakers as they did, or be destroyed. William Gray, otherwise known as Boozer, was born in the late 1970s and grew up in Adrian, Oregon. As a child, his father took him elk hunting and taught him how to track wild animals from miles away. He also visited his uncle's farm located near the Idaho border. In the summers, he worked on the beef fields and learned how to ride an old dirt bike and discovered his love of motorcycles. In high school, Boozer met a girl named Joni, where they fell in love and eventually happily married. The couple often talked about purchasing a house located near Barley Lake. As an adult, Boozer worked as a truck driver and owned an 18-wheeler. He was later patched into the Mongrels Motorcycle Club, where he rose through the ranks and eventually earned the title of Sergeant at Arms and served as the right-hand man of the President Jack. He later met his fellow enforcement member named Deacon St. John, who became his closest friend, and the pair came to regard each other as brothers. He later befriended a newly patched member named Jersey Jim. Tragically, one night, Boozer and Joni went out for a drunken joyride where he crashed his motorcycle off Highway 97 and Joni was killed. The MC later arrived at the scene where Deacon dragged Boozer away and they were forced to leave Joni's corpse behind, then lied to the police about the event, in order to spare Boozer a conviction for manslaughter. Joni's death drove Boozer into a deep depression and he descended into alcoholism, because he felt enormous guilt that his wife died. Boozer was later introduced to Deacon's girlfriend named Sarah, a botanist where the two became close friends, and he came to regard her as a little sister. Deacon later chose to become a nomad. This decision upset the majority of his brothers within the MC, apart from Boozer, who remained loyal towards him. At the wedding, hosted in Marion Forks, other than the minister, Boozer was the only individual that attended their wedding. At the start of the outbreak, Boozer meets up with Deacon and Sarah, making his way through their town with them. Sarah was born to a middle-class family in Seattle, Washington. She grew up with her little sister, Emma, whom she was very close to. Sarah attended college, majoring in botany. After graduating with 2 PhDs, she got a job as a researcher from the bioengineering company Cloverdale, presumably in 2013. Cloverdale opened a lab in Iron Butte, Oregon, which Sarah transferred to in order to study the rare plants that grew in the area. Sarah's car breaks down. While tending to the matter, she is approached by a biker named Deacon St. After some playful banter, he offers her a ride to a location with better cell service, which she accepts. After nearly being hit by a pickup truck, Sarah receives a call from work and informs them of her situation. Requesting a tow truck, she and Deacon return to her car, only to find the same pickup truck parked by it, with a group of thugs parting it out. As Deacon attempts to fight them off, Sarah tries and fails to contact police due to her poor cell service. She then begins to shuffle through Deacon's saddlebag and finds a pistol. She nervously fires off a shot that succeeds in scaring the thugs off, and begins to panic due to never having fired a gun before. Deacon reassures and thanks her, offering to wait with her until the tow truck arrives. Shortly after this, Sarah and Deacon begin dating. Over time, they begin to learn things from one another, with Sarah teaching Deacon about practical application of certain plants, such as lavender being used as a burn medicine. Deacon, on the other hand, teaches Sarah how to ride a motorcycle. She also becomes aware of Deacon's involvement in the Mongrels Motorcycle Club, and even becomes good friends with William Gray, aka Boozer. Sarah tries to talk to Deacon about moving in together, which he seems reluctant towards. However, one night he takes Sarah out for a walk along a trail near a marijuana farm owned by the MC, jokingly asking her for input. He then takes her to a clearing with a waterfall where he proceeds to propose to her, using his MC ring as an engagement ring. Sarah agrees on several conditions, one of them being that he agrees to never leave her. She takes a moment to admire the ring, with Deacon pointing out an inscription, the Latin phrase Moria Invictus, which translates to death before defeat. The pair was soon interrupted by a call from Cloverdale requesting Sarah's presence. Soon after this, Sarah gifted Deacon a custom gas tank. At some point, Cloverdale changed Sarah's clearance for the area she worked in. David Gorman, a young research engineer, told Sarah that Cloverdale was developing some kind of classified project. Sarah tried to convince him that he was just being paranoid and to drop it. However, he didn't listen to her. One day, Sarah was leaving work with Deacon for a break, diffusing a confrontation between him and a security guard Jim on the way out. Deacon has Sarah drive, but moments later the couple were nearly hit by an oncoming semi-truck. With Sarah narrowly managing to swerve out of harm's way, Deacon tries to console her and calls attention to his new patch, which reads Nomad. He claims this means he will be less involved in the MC, hoping for the two of them to spend more time together, as well as for her parents to be more accepting of him. She shrugs this off, proclaiming that she doesn't wish to change anything for the sake of pleasing her parents. On the way back, a police car speeds up the road, seemingly heading towards Cloverdale. The couple rush back, and the security guard tells Sarah that she is needed. The day of Deacon and Sarah's wedding arrives. Taking place at the church in Marion Forks, Boozer is the only guest in attendance. Sarah tells Deacon that the fact no one else has turned up is a symbol of how much he means to him, and that she doesn't care that no one else came, as she would willingly give up anything for him. Deacon promises Sarah that he will always love her and never leave her. Sarah also offers him back his Mongrel's ring, on the condition that he promises to ride her as much as he rides his bike. Much to Deacon's amusement and the priest's discomfort, the pair share a kiss as Boozer applauds. Sometime later during the Freaker outbreak, Sarah comes looking for Gorman after discovering someone had burglarized the secure wing of Cloverdale. She travels to Cloverdale office in Farewell to look for him, only to find he had been gone for 2 weeks. Around this time, people became infected with a viral mutagenic that over time turned humans into heavily mutated animalistic monsters later known as freakers, causing widespread chaos. Martial law is declared. Sarah meets up with Deacon and Boozer with the intent of escaping Farewell. The couple stumble upon a very young girl in the chaos. Sarah tries to help her, but the girl stabs her in the side. Deacon fires a warning shot to scare the girl off. Sarah's condition rapidly worsens. Deacon and Boozer manage to get her to a nearby rooftop where a Nero chopper is preparing to depart. Deacon threatens one of the agents, James O'Brien, to take her in. He reluctantly agrees, but points out there is only space for 2 more. Deacon decides to stay with Boozer, who has also been wounded, and gives Sarah his Mongol ring, saying he wants it back. O'Brien tells Deacon they are headed to a refugee camp west of Three Finger Jack before finally departing. During the flight, the helicopter is made aware that the camp has been overrun and that they are to be diverted to Silver Lake. Upon arrival, Sarah is brought into surgery. After a 6-hour operation, she is stabilized, eventually making a full recovery. Sarah is told that the refugee camp was overrun and everyone was dead, leading her to believe Deacon was among those killed. Sarah was moved to a camp outside Chemult, where she stayed until a horde moved into the area. Nero took Sarah due to a federal clearance, and she was placed in a new refugee camp. After almost a year, the camp would go on to be seized by the Deschutes County Militia. Sarah joined the militia, hoping to do some good, specifically hoping she could research the virus and potentially even find a cure. Enlistment, however, meant she had to give up Deacon's ring, which she reluctantly agreed to. The militia leader, Colonel Matthew Garret, believed she was making a biological weapon capable of killing off all the freakers, and assigned people to requisition the supplies she would need to develop her weapon. Still mourning Deacon, Sarah shrugs off the advances of the men around the camp, such as fellow officer and competing weapon developer James Weaver. This earned her a reputation of being cold and distant amongst the militia members, who dubbed her the Wizard Island Witch. For around a year, Sarah conducted tests on freakers, collecting blood samples in an attempt to reverse engineer the virus. Sarah's work is constantly delayed due to the inefficiency of those who are trying to receive the equipment she needs. Mark Copeland, also known as Cope, is a supporting character featured in Days Gone. Copeland is a survivor of the 2017 Freakers outbreak and the leader of the Copeland's camp, a faction located along the shore of Peaceful Lake in Oregon. He is a conspiracy theorist with an intense hatred for American government. Copeland is one of the primary job providers for Deacon St. John. Not much is known about Copeland's early life, except that while growing up, he went out hunting with his father and they once worked together in building a fallout shelter during the Cold War. It was his father who was responsible for instilling Copeland's extreme libertarian beliefs and distrust towards the federal government. Copeland served in the US Marine Corps when he was younger. At some point, Copeland had a son named Christopher, nicknamed Chrissy, who lived outside of Oregon, but would return in hunting seasons to be with his father. In the last few weeks prior to the collapse of human civilization, Copeland began his conspiracy radio show, Radio Free Oregon, where he expresses his conspiracy-fueled political beliefs. His broadcast is shown from his unmarked van, traveling from town to town before finally founding his own survivor camp. 2 years after the Freaker outbreak, Copeland still continued to run his radio show. In his radio segments, he claims that he knew what was coming in the early days of the infection, and that the government was responsible for the end of civilization. Though much of what he has to say is either twisted to suit his own goals or factually wrong. Because of his out-of-touch mindfulness, Copeland is treated with annoyance from other survivors outside of his camp, such as Deacon and Iron Mike, who called out the conspiracy theorist a truther. Ada Tucker is another character that you encounter throughout the game. There's not really much lore on her, but I will do my best to sort of give a few personality traits about her that will sort of give you a good painted picture of her. Before the apocalypse, Tucker was the head of the female ward at a penitentiary. She believed that everyone had to work in order to earn their keep. Tucker is in charge of the Hot Springs camp, which she runs as a forced labor camp. She employs deacons to supply new workers for the camp and track down anyone that escaped the camp. Ada Tucker spent most of her career in the criminal justice, where she worked next to a range of criminals whom she felt were constantly testing and prodding her for weaknesses. In response, Tucker formed a deep-seated form of brutalization, separating her work life from her at-home life, and developed a low-grade paranoia that she should expect betrayal from anyone. Working her way up through the ranks, she eventually became the matron of the women's ward, a warden in a state penitentiary for women, before retiring with her husband to the Marion Forks region. According to Lisa, Tucker was the model of a friendly neighbor and someone who elicited immediate trust. However, at some point prior to the outbreak, her husband committed Sudoku, rather than living with a painful illness, despite having previously promised not to. This further escalated Tucker's paranoia and distrust for others. After the outbreak, she developed a very low opinion of most survivors, believing that they were freakier than the freaks to survive. She once again adopted her matron personality during the settlement of Hot Springs, which, under her leadership, became an authoritarian regime based on eclecticism. Newcomers were greeted warmly at first, but later encouraged to make sacrifices for the greater good, giving up personal properties such as food and supplies, and later given assignments around the camp for work. Tucker saw every act of reluctance, grumbling, or disagreement as a personal attack against her leadership and the camp, eventually dividing her loyalists into enforcers and treating everyone else as inmates in a work camp. In her mind, she believed that everyone in the camp is a lazy freeloader, ready to take food without contributing and receiving her protection without lifting a hand in support. Ironically, while some camp members are indeed opportunists and thieves, a great many aren't lazy but exhausted, and are stealing food because of starvation. Like the other camp leaders, Tucker is a study in contradictions. She has a charming exterior that masks ruthless tendencies, showing genuine affection for members of her camp but can turn on them at the first sign of disloyalty, and claims that efforts and property are used for the greater good, while in reality being stockpiled within her camp. Tucker is fearful of losing control of the camp and maintains a list of names for who she can trust, with many crossed out. Unlike Copeland, whose gruff exterior masks sincere care for his camp, Tucker's charm and praise of the greater good hides her disdain and distrust of her settlement. Michael Wilcox, more commonly known as Iron Mike, is a major side character in Days Gone. He is the survivor of a freaker outbreak and the leader of Lost Lake Encampment. Mike was born in 1941 and grew up around Hood River County, Oregon. As a child, he played in the northern caves with his father, who fancied himself as a geologist and would spend hours explaining how the caves were formed by lava many years ago. As a young adult, he worked as a forest serviceman for several decades, managing the wilderness in the Cascade Range, upon where he gathered a distinct knowledge of the area, including mercury mining, which occurred in the early 1900s. Mike also met and befriended a young man named Jack, the future president of the Mongrels Motorcycle Club. He once took him fishing. He later met and fell in love with a woman named Elizabeth, where the pair eventually married and lived together for 30 years. However, Mike never desired to have any children of his own, as he found them harassing, which caused a heavy strain between him and Elizabeth for some time, despite them doing things they loved together, such as hiking trails and mountain climbing very often. Tragically, Elizabeth was later diagnosed with cancer and eventually passed away, leaving Mike heartbroken. In the early months of the apocalypse, Iron Mike was part of Sherman's camp, which was made up of surviving law enforcement and civilians. Eventually, two factions formed in the camp, creating an increasingly hostile situation within the settlement. A meeting was set up between both sides, as it was believed that everyone had run out of ammunition, but it was quickly discovered that one faction still had ammunition. Everyone killed each other, save for Mike and Nora, who barely escaped the carnage with their lives. The incident deeply scarred Mike, making him not so much of a fan of violence. Sometime after the Sherman's Camp massacre, Mike formed another group in Lost Lake, which had the goals of pacifism between all survivors in mind. Still shaken from the carnage in Sherman's camp, Amongst his core members were Skizzo, Rikki and Addison, Deacon and Boozer. Eventually joined Mike's camp and helped it greatly. Mike and Deacon became close at the time. However, Deacon's violent way of handling situations led to a falling out between the two, with Deacon telling Mike to go fuck himself. Shortly after, Deacon and Boozer left, and they were banned from returning there. Rikki Patil is a main character in Days Gone. She is a survivor of the Freak outbreak and the second in command of Iron Mike's camp. She is a former companion of Deacon and Boozer, and is a romantic partner of Addison Walker. Rikki was born in the late 1980s and lived in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. As a child, she was raised by her father, Krishna, alongside her two elder brothers. Her father was knowledgeable in repairing vehicles and was aided by her brothers, which inspired Rikki to pursue her career in engineering. At the age of 17, her father got her employment at the aerospace company Boeing, while at the same time she studied in school to become a mechanical engineer. As an adult, she worked in the city, enjoyed couch surfing and returned home for the weekends. On the day of the outbreak, Rikki was 100 miles away from home, and by the time she arrived back to her house, everyone was gone and presumed dead. The roads were blocked up all the way down to the coast of Willamette, practically being a war zone. At some point, Rikki first met Boozer and Deacon after helping them fight off a band of raiders. She rode with them until settling down at Iron Mike's settlement, determined to help Mike in restoring civilization. Rikki became good friends with fellow survivor Addison Walker, eventually forming a romantic relationship with her. Rikki reluctantly parted ways with Deacon and Boozer after the former had a falling out with Iron Mike over his pacifist ways. She also formed a severe dislike for Skizzo after she found him hiding outside her and Addie's cabin when they were bathing, threatening to kill him if he was caught doing it again. She reconnects with Deacon after he rescues Lisa from a group of rippers and asks her to take her to Lost Lake, away for Ada Tucker and the hot springs. James O'Brien is introduced as a graduate student who helps the protagonist Deacon St. John evacuate his wife Sarah at the beginning of the Freakers outbreak, only to be believed dead afterwards. His character is reintroduced as a member of the National Emergency Response Organization, holding the rank of lieutenant. He is forced into working with Deacon to find out about Sarah's fate. Nothing is really known about James O'Brien prior to the outbreak, other than that he is a graduate student. O'Brien volunteered to help Nero at the start of the outbreak. O'Brien met Deacon St. John and his wife Sarah during the early weeks of the apocalypse. He loaded survivors onto a Nero helicopter when the two arrived at the evacuation site. Deacon tried to get Sarah onto the helicopter as she was stabbed, but O'Brien, while sympathetic, was unable to load anyone else. Jesse Williamson, also known as Carlos, is a major character and antagonist of Days Gone. Announcing his original name after the Freakers outbreak, Carlos is the leader of the Rippers, a cult that worships Freakers. An excommunicated member of the Mongrels Motorcycle Club, Carlos is a personal enemy to the protagonist Deacon, and also Boozer. Before he was known as Carlos, Jesse used to know Deacon and Boozer long before the apocalypse. Jesse always held a grudge against them, as they picked on and pushed him around. His contention with his fellow bikers led to him murdering a fellow member over drugs. The club president, Jack, punished Jesse by painfully removing his mongrel's tattoo via welding torch, while Deacon and Boozer held Jesse down, before excommunicating him from the MC. This traumatic incident led to Jesse wanting to be free of the scars and memories that weighed him down throughout his life. This became possible when the apocalypse began. No longer Jesse, Carlos came to lead the Rippers. He came to believe that the Freakers are perfect because everything that they used to be was erased, including their pain. And wanting to get people to that point, Carlos encouraged his followers to abandon their names in order to change. Over the course of the apocalypse, the Rippers under his leadership rose as a widely feared faction. He formed an uneasy truce with Iron Mike and his settlement. Eventually, Carlos learned that Deacon and Boozer were still alive, and has been sending his men to antagonize them for some time. Intent on turning them into Rippers, Carlos puts a bounty on their heads for their capture. Despite this, Deacon and Boozer had not known why Carlos was antagonizing them. Unaware of his former identity, Raymond Sarkozy, otherwise known as Skizzo, He is a member of Iron Mike's camp who works as one of the heads of security. Skizzo was from California, either from Sacramento or Fresno. He attended college and graduated with honors. Skizzo would later lie and brag of being a gangbanger and having smuggled drugs and guns from California to Oregon. After the Freaker virus decimated the world, Skizzo ended up at the Lost Lake camp led by Iron Mike, eventually earning the role of head security. Though he was frequently at odds with everyone else in the camp, particularly due to him abusing his authority. When Iron Mike formed a treaty with the Rest in Peace cult leader Carlos, Skizzo objected as he considered the Rippers to be no longer human and would inevitably betray the treaty. Colonel Matthew Garret is a US military veteran and former addict. Garret founded the Desertutes County Militia during the apocalypse to eradicate the Freakers. However, his frantic religious views gradually warped his mind, resulting in him becoming dangerously unstable. Matthew Garret served in the US military a couple of decades before the Freaker apocalypse. He was a religious fanatic who believed that the end of the world was coming and that he would receive a vision from God to preserve the righteousness of humanity. He led a religious movement called God's Army and spent the last 2 decades warning his followers to prepare for the coming apocalypse and gather around him in the wilderness. Sometime earlier in the Freaker outbreak, Colonel Garret founded the Desertutes County Militia and began quickly recruiting survivors into his army, leading them to attack government and Nero facilities, capturing supplies and weapons and destroying bridges and highways to prevent the Freaker hordes from advancing. Garret led his militia to the Crater Lake, where he set up Wizard Island as his base of operations, believing that he and his militia are humanity's only hope for survival. Colonel Garret had been seeking to recruit more survivors, assigning scientists and engineers developing anti-Freaker weapons and sending field teams to gather any crucial data and knowledge to be stored in the caves of Wizard Island, which he dubbed as the Ark, a repository for all of human civilization's knowledge. And that's going to do it for this one. Hope you enjoyed diving into the world of Days Gone and exploring more of the character's lore and backgrounds with me. Feel free to drop a like, and if you want to see more content like this, character deep dives, game lore and all that stuff, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments which character is your favourite, or if there's someone you want me to cover next. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.
We've all done things we're not proud of.